Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the path to liberty. It's Monday morning, December 2nd, 2019. I hope everyone had an amazing and awesome, a fun, a relaxing, enjoyable Thanksgiving holiday and a Thanksgiving weekend. It's been a week since I've done this show, and I feel out of practice. I don't know how people do a weekly podcast or broadcast at all because I'm so used to doing it 3 times a week. And then sometimes in the early part of the year, I do an extra show in the evening with nullification news reports throughout the week. So I think I'm probably going to be doing that again this year. A lot of people seem to like it last nullification season in early 2019. So keep an eye out for that in the near future. Anyway, so yesterday was my birthday. And since I turned 47 years old this year. And since it's hard for me to kind of bring treats to the whole class like I used to when I was a kid, I thought it would be fun to find a way to share something of mine with you, for those of you who spend time with me each and every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. So today I'm going to give you my own personal favorite top 10 quotes from the founders and revolutionaries. I'm probably actually going to skip a couple of some that are actually very impactful for me because I've done full episodes on those particular quotes themselves. But I thought this would be interesting to share things that really have had an impact on me and the stories behind them. And I've kind of tried to do my best to organize them in a way that tells a story about my views on liberty and the Constitution based on kind of repeating what the founders had to say about them in various situations throughout history. Anyways, my name is Michael Boldin. We broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles. We have video versions that we broadcast live on, I think 5, Facebook, YouTube, DLive, Periscope, and Twitch. Plus, we have archived video versions at Brighteon.com, BitChute.com, BitTubers.com. We also have an audio-only podcast edition that we do through iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and elsewhere. You can find all of those channels to follow us on, all of our social media accounts to follow us on, ways to get our newsletter, to support us for as little as $2 a month for our membership program, all of our archives for all the shows that we've ever done, plus show notes, episode links, and all that stuff for every single episode we've done as well over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty is really where you can follow the show. And in the next month or two, depending on how crazy busy it is through the Christmas season here and the ramp up to the nullification season for 2020, I do hope, and I know I've mentioned this on the show for those of you who watch or listen regularly, I've mentioned this in the past, I want to upgrade that page so it's a lot easier to search through and find various episodes based on topic. So that's the next kind of upgrade I want to do with that page, rather than just being a chronological order in reverse order of the most recent episodes. If you have ideas on what I should do, leave it in the comments. Things that I should cover, ways I should improve the website, whatever it may be, leave it in the comments. I do read them all, even if I don't get a chance to get back to everything. And also the same with email, team@10thamendmentcenter.com, all spelled out, team@10thamendmentcenter.com. If you've got messages for me, from Harry, or for anybody else that blogs or writes here, we pass them around and get back to as many as possible. And we really appreciate your feedback. Anyways, taking a quick look over at the live chat before we get into the fun top 10 quotes. For me, at least personally, all very, very kind of everyone to say happy birthday. I've seen tons of comments both on my personal profile on Facebook, but then also here in the live chat on YouTube and elsewhere. Thank you so much, guys. Good to see Clay Davis, Justin Morrison, Essential Freedom, Patricia, Funky Euphemism, Yo Mama, David Smith, Ward Lawrence, Real Evan Camp over on Periscope. That's pretty cool too. MRGF78, and everyone else. If I missed you, I'm just kind of scrolling through to get through this because I've got 10 quotes, and maybe I'll give you guys a bonus one that isn't from the founders, but really, really had a lot of impact on me in my day-to-day work and in my kind of transition, I guess we'll say, from former Marxist. I used to proudly proclaim myself to be a Marxist to now a supporter of the Constitution and liberty today. And I'm also still trying to grow each and every day and each and every year and learn more and more. And a lot of times, to me, it's really cool. I do episodes on something that comes up in the current events of the day or of the week, and then I have to really dig on it dig in on it and I learn something new. So a lot of times I explore these things with you guys as I go through this show. Anyways, so Funky Euphemism says, yes, bonus quote. I've got that. Okay, I'll save that one for the last. That should be fun. Anyways, let's get right to this. And first of all, I start with John Dickinson. For those of you who have a 10th Amendment Center membership card, I don't have my wallet here. It's in the other room. Anyways, on the membership card, we have a quote from Dickinson. He was known as the penman of the Revolution, primarily for his great writing in response to the Townshend Acts of 1767. This was basically a follow-up to the Stamp Act, and he wrote a series of 12 letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania in opposition to this. In his first letter, and each letter he actually signed it off with a Latin phrase. His first letter, and this is not in the top 10 because I've done an entire episode on this, he signed it off Concordia res parve crescunt. That's a Latin phrase that means small things grow great by concord. And that means, at least in his letter at that time, and I think it applies today as well, every small step towards liberty is an important one, because each time you take a stand for something, each small thing that you do, every time you educate, you lead by example, other people can rally to the cause as well. And then when more and more people get together, that small step turns into something great. And he was clearly right when it came to resisting the empire and the American Revolution. But here's another quote from him that I'm going to start out. And these aren't, again, in any particular order, other than I kind of tried to group them in order to tell a bit of a story here. He said, all artful rulers, this was also from his letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania. This was number 6, I think. All artful rulers who strive to extend their power beyond its just limits endeavor to give their attempts as much semblance of legality as possible. And this is a timeless truth for the penman of the Revolution in the middle 18th century, and it should be a timeless truth for us today as well. You don't ever hear people advocating for a federal program or a state-level program. You never hear government people talk about something as being an unconstitutional act. Every single proposal from every single politician at every single level of government is legal according to them. And either they're an artful ruler trying to give their attempts, like Dickinson said, as much semblance of legality as possible, or they're just clueless on it. They just believe that government can do anything it wants. And of course, I grew up a good, loving socialist, a statist. I called myself a Marxist for many years. I was probably a really bad one, but I really believed in the power of the state. And so I thought that every problem had a government-run solution. And of course, you're filled from day one. Your heads are filled from day one that whatever government does really is illegal until the courts strike it down. So this, I think, is a very, very important one, because every proposal coming from government, and of course, here at TAC, we focus primarily on the federal problems, of course, but there are many at the state and local level. But all these politicians will always try to convince you that what they're doing is legal. No one said, oh, this Affordable Care Act, we know we're not supposed to do it, but it's really necessary, and we're going to convince you on the necessity of it. We never heard the same about the Patriot Act or the illegal invasion of Iraq, or the many, many things that they've done over the years. The Federal Reserve Act, the National Firearms Act of 1934, the Gun Control Act of 68, and on and on. You don't ever hear, this is unconstitutional. They always make the claim that they are authorized to do this. Even if they talk about the Constitution at all, you'll get a Nancy Pelosi type of response, like to questions about the Commerce Clause. Like, are you serious? Do we really even need to do this? Do we have to answer these questions? Because they believe everything that they do is okay. But what he followed up with in that particular phrase was really important in that letter number 6. He said, those who succeed them, so those who follow the rulers, the artful rulers who try to give legal impact or try to give legal cover to what they're trying to do, may venture to go a little further. So every step turns into another step, the other direction. Small things grow great by concord, he told us in the first letter. Here by the 6th, he's telling us that it can go the other way as well. You never want to turn a blind eye. You never want to turn a blind eye to even the smallest violation, because one ruler does it one way, and the next one's going to use that as a floor, a starting point, and we'll go a little further. He said, for each new encroachment will be strengthened by a former. That which is now supported by examples growing old will become an example itself, he wrote, and thus support fresh usurpations. And usurpation to the founder, this was a very commonly understood term to mean stealing of power. It is theft of power that doesn't belong to them. And it's primarily in regards to politicians, to government. Number 9 here, or number 2, depending on how you count it, is from Patrick Henry. This was from a great speech that he gave on the federal Constitution in the Virginia ratifying convention. It was June of 1788, I believe, June 5th. He said, "Show me that age and country where the rights and liberties of the people were placed on the sole chance of their rulers being good men without a consequent loss of liberty." So never trust politicians. Politicians can't be trusted. Government cannot be trusted. Relying on the government to do the right thing is dangerous because, as Patrick Henry noted back then, all through history, every country, anytime the people relied on the politicians, the rulers, he called them, to be good, to do the right thing, they always ended up losing their liberty. And the same can be said for the couple of centuries since then as well. Don't trust government, I think, is the timeless message from Patrick Henry. And then talking about usurpation, we also get George Washington. In his famous farewell address, which I've done episodes and short videos on here as well, he said, "Usurpation is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed." Usurpation is the customary way. And usurpation going back to Dickinson a few decades earlier. So he wrote, this came out in 1796. 3 decades earlier in the 1760s, Dickinson was talking about that same thing, that usurpation, because the one step that happens today will be the floor, the baseline for the next usurpation tomorrow. And Washington, he put it this way: "Let there be no change by usurpation, for though this in one instance may be the instrument of good." So you may like what they're doing through that usurpation. "It is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. The precedent must always greatly overbalance in permanent evil any partial or transient benefit which the use can at any time yield." This is a consistent, regular message from the founders and great old revolutionaries for decades. If you turn a blind eye to one violation of your rights, of your Constitution today by one person because you like what they're doing today, or it's too difficult to oppose it, or maybe it doesn't affect you directly, if you turn a blind eye to it today, someone else is going to expand on that in the future. And whether it's Dickinson or Washington or Henry or anyone in between, you cannot trust any of these people. So what do you do about it? The next, of course, comes from Theophilus Parsons. Theophilus Parsons was a leading supporter of the Constitution in Massachusetts. He was often told that whatever side he decided to argue on was going to win in Massachusetts. This guy was an incredible orator. And so in a speech in the Massachusetts Ratification Convention, he put it this way: "An act of usurpation is not obligatory." Again, that same word, usurpation. When they steal power that doesn't belong to them, no one's obliged to follow it. He said it is not law, and any man may be justified in his resistance. So philosophically and morally, everyone is justified in opposing and resisting unconstitutional acts. Now, they may not be practical to resist at all times. It may be too dangerous. But morally speaking, Parsons is telling us anyone is justified in their resistance to an act of usurpation. He goes on, he said, "Let him be considered as a criminal by the general government." And they called the federal government the general government at that time. "Let him be considered a criminal. Yet only his fellow citizens can convict him. They are his jury. And if they pronounce him innocent, not all the powers of Congress can hurt him, and innocent they certainly will pronounce him if the supposed law he resisted was an act of usurpation." That, of course, is at a time when I guess Parsons was assuming that the people would be well-read and well-understanding. They would really know the limitations of the Constitution. They would know when an act was an act of usurpation. So I think the end is a little difficult here, but philosophically, the principle really holds. He's talking about the moral justification to oppose, to reject, to resist, to nullify unconstitutional acts, to not participate in them, to not be obliged to participate in them. And then he's also talking about jury nullification as well, because in the end, if the general government, the federal government, is so evil that it considers us all criminals, if we, the people of the several states, our neighbors, if none of us are considering ourselves to be criminals, then it really has no impact. But it does take a very well-educated population to cover that. And again, that was Theophilus Parsons from the Massachusetts Ratifying Convention. And then I'm probably going to say that Samuel Adams was probably my favorite founder. I waffle on that a little bit, but this is a great quote from back in 1771. He wrote a number of times under the name Candidus in the Boston Gazette, and he put it this way: "The truth is, all might be free if they valued freedom and defended it as they ought." And I recently hand-signed about 1,500 letters with this message on it to a number of people who are subscribed to us here at TAC. It's a small percentage, so maybe you'll see that in the mail in the near future. But we also sent this out as an email, posted it as a blog with a little bit more commentary about it as well. And to me, this really, the more that I've reflected on this quote over the years, this really sums up our work, our 1-2 punch of our work here at the TAC. First of all, we want to educate people on the proper role of government under the Constitution. About liberty, about freedom. And then we also want to educate and activate people in support of it, to defend it, even when government refuses to participate. And when I talk about defending freedom, defending liberty, defending the Constitution, that doesn't mean waiting for Washington, D.C. to suddenly follow it. That doesn't mean waving the Constitution in front of the politicians and say, see, the founders told us that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, so you better stop or I'm going to sue you in your own courts. No, that doesn't mean it. It means much more than that. It goes back to what Parsons had to say and others. Anyone is justified in their resistance to this. And of course, it does take great strategy to do that. Let me see if I've got the next one. Oh, the next one is John Hancock. I love John Hancock. I just recently read a book about him. And this was a letter that he sent to his agent in London just a couple of days or a couple of weeks before the Stamp Act was going to go into effect in 1765. And he put it this way: the people of this country will never be made slaves of by a submission to the damned act. This, to me, is the mentality that a free people are going to have. If you want to live free, you have to have this view. And I've got another quote from Thomas Jefferson right along this line, that no matter what they pass in government, it doesn't have any effect unless there's obedience, unless there's compliance, unless there's submission. And Hancock was absolutely correct, at least when it came to the Stamp Act, that the people were not going to submit to it. There has to be resistance to it. Government doesn't willingly hand over powers that it's already usurped, that it's taken. It's absolutely going to require some level of resistance, not obeying them. And then, of course, James Madison is another one that I like to cite all the time. And this one kind of just pops out of nowhere, I guess. Maybe it doesn't flow with the rest, but I cite it pretty regularly. It's James Madison talking about the threats to liberty in a paper called Political Observations from 1795. And he's talking about war as being so dangerous. And let me read this to you, because I think no matter how many times you've heard me say this, it's probably worth hearing it one more time. Of all the enemies to public liberty, war is, perhaps, the most to be dreaded, because it comprises and develops the germ of every other. War is the parent of armies. From these proceed debts and taxes. And armies and debts and taxes are the known instruments for bringing the many under the domination of the few. And ladies and gentlemen, we definitely have a trifecta here today. I don't need to really go into detail with my own personal explanation on that. Madison was really clear on that one as well. This other one comes from the great Richard Henry Lee in a letter to Samuel Adams in 1787. He did not support the Constitution as presented for ratification. He said he would only support it with amendments. And this is what he put with it. He said the people, in this letter to Samuel Adams explaining that, the people had not fought the British only to be brought under despotic rule under the notion of strong government or in the form of elective despotism. So that one I think is also pretty self-explanatory from Richard Henry Lee. One of my favorites comes from Thomas Paine in Common Sense in 1776. Oh, this is the letter. Oh, this is actually really cool. I'm glad I put this link here. And I'm going to have links to all of these in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. He said, chains still being chains, whether made of gold or iron. It doesn't matter how prosperous or great your country may be, but if there are limits on your freedom, you're still wearing those chains, whether made of gold or iron. That is also a really timeless quote. Again, Richard Henry Lee to his friend Samuel Adams. Their friendship was really, really cool because they came from such different backgrounds, but philosophically, they really, really got along when it came to understanding the nature of power and wanting to restrict that power as well. And here's Thomas Paine writing in Common Sense in 1776. Again, all of these I think are incredibly timeless. We can apply them at any stage in our history. And for many of these, we're talking about all through history. Like when Patrick Henry said, show me that age and country. Any time in history, any country in history where you trust the rulers to be good and then you don't lose your liberty. Here's Paine. He said, society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. So he's saying, you know, if you've got a range of bad through worst, bad, good, better, best, however you want to use it in the corporate world these days, I hear good, better, best all the time. He said, even at its best state on that continuum, it's a necessary evil. It's still evil, but the rest of the time, it's much worse than that. He says, in its worst state, an intolerable evil. So at best, government is seen as a necessary evil. Whether you think it's necessary or not, I think the quote itself really says much more than that. He's saying, even if you agree that it's important to do this, it is still evil, and you still have to keep a very watchful eye on that evil, and you can't trust those people. This is the same message from all of these founders. He says, in its worst state, it's an intolerable one. For when we suffer or are exposed to the same miseries by a government, and he put that in italics, so he's really emphasized, when we're exposed to the same miseries by a government, which we might expect in a country without government, our calamity is heightened by reflecting that we furnish the means by which we suffer. And I'm not sure if that really had the impact that I wanted it to as I'm reading it, but he's basically saying, when you have a government that's an intolerable evil, you are paying for it. You are giving it the means to violate your own rights. And there are times where you have to throw that government off, is what he's really saying. If you think of the time when this was written, Common Sense in 1776, he's talking about separating from the British Empire. And again, that's the same as what Richard Henry Lee was having to say. You know, we don't want an elective despotism. Chains are still chains, whether made of gold or iron. This is the same message over a decade later that what Thomas Paine had to say in 1776. Next up is the one that I was mentioning just briefly a moment ago. A free people claim their rights. This is Thomas Jefferson in 1774, The Rights of British America. A free people claim their rights as derived from the laws of nature and not as the gift of their chief magistrate. So you aren't free. You aren't a free society if what you're doing is you're waiting for your government to say, okay, you can be free now. Here are your rights. We put them down in a document, and now you can go exercise those rights. This is the mentality, the opposite mentality of Jefferson, when people say the Second Amendment is my gun permit. No, 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 no. A free people claim their rights as derived from the laws of nature, Jefferson wrote. So your right to keep and bear arms is a natural right. You're not getting that because it was handed down to you, because it was written on a document. What's written down on a document is a set of rules to limit the government. Then it's up to the people because, as we know, James Madison told us in Federalist 48, and many other founders talked about the Constitution the same way. The Constitution itself was considered a mere parchment barrier. Parchments don't enforce themselves. And free people have to claim their rights, we know. They have to act free whether government wants them to or not. That was Thomas Jefferson in the summary view of the rights of British America in 1774. It's paraphrased, but it really has the same impact in my view. And then my favorite, I think this may not be the best if we're doing a countdown from 10 to 1. But it's my favorite because this is the first one that I really remember. Somehow I got into this book from John Adams, his early writings, while I was still hard left on many, many things. I was self-identifying with the left for sure, and I started reading some things from the founders, and a lot of it was really boring, but I just kept reading through this. And I remember I've got the old book somewhere where I was taking notes, and this particular one was really, really important to me. This is in the early days, and you've heard me mention many times that John Adams, I believe, had a big shift once the Constitution was passed, or after the Revolution. He was really one of the best voices for liberty in the early days when he was young, but he went a different direction later on. But even in comparison to today, even the bad John Adams would be far better. If we had a government filled with those people, we'd be far better off than the politicians of today. But this one really, really hits me quite a bit. It was from 1763, again in the Boston Gazette. That's also where in 1771 Samuel Adams wrote about defending freedom under the pen name Candidus, but he put it this way: the favorites of parties, although the favorites of parties, although they have always some virtues, have always many imperfections. Many of the ablest tongues and pens have in every age been employed in the foolish, deluded, and pernicious flattery of one set of partisans, and in furious, prostitute invectives against another. But such kinds of oratory never had any charms for me, and if I must do one or the other, I would quarrel with both parties and with every individual of each before I would subjugate my understanding or prostitute my tongue or pen to either. I mean, he did not mince words. We sent this out in a short blog post by our email campaign, which you can register for at 10thamendmentcenter.com/register through the Thanksgiving holiday. And this is really talking about principle over party. We are warned over and over by the founders the dreadful despotism that would come from the alternate ruling of one faction over the other. And that's what they called parties. They really referenced them as factions. Adams also warned in 1780 that there was nothing more than he was fearful of than just the country being reduced to one side versus the other. Washington talked about this and many others as well. In Federalist 10, they talked about factions. That was James Madison. And on and on. But he's really just saying, look, no matter what you want me to do, I am not going to prostitute myself to one team or the other, period. My tongue or pen. I'm not going to speak in favor of you. I am not going to write for you, no matter how much you offer me, because that's really what we're talking about, being a sellout to a team over principle. And we see this happen so often today. And for us, you'll see us post memes regularly on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Minds.com, LinkedIn, even all these social media channels. You'll see us say things like less Republican, less Democrat, more Constitution. And that's really a follow-through on this type of message. We don't really care what side someone's on, what team they're on. We're not going to defend them because they're against the Dems. We're not going to defend these guys because they're against the Republicans. We're only going to stand for what's right. And for us, that's the Constitution, every issue, every time, no exceptions, and no excuses. So let's take a look over at the live chat before I get to that one bonus quote that I think will be fun. And, you know, this isn't our normal episode. So if you're joining us for the first time here, usually we dig in real deep on constitutional issues, on strategy for liberty, on nullification, on views of the founders. And this is really just me sharing some of my personal favorites. This is my birthday treat to share with you guys today. Helen Mosley says, only the biggest proponents of liberty get right back to the grind after their birthday. Technically, I should have been working yesterday, but I decided to take the day off. I ate a little too much. I really enjoyed it. My lovely partner, Sarah, helped me with a lot of stuff this last week as I was working through some things. I've been recovering from a back injury and things like that, but it was awesome having a little time off. Good to see you, buddy, Ellen. I also want to say to other people, hi to Frank I. Luke Porras, how was everyone's Thanksgiving? Mine was awesome. I really enjoyed it. It was short and it was very simple. We hung out with Sarah's cousin and her brother, and we went out to eat and went home and relaxed and got on the phone with some other relatives. It was really cool. I hope you guys had a really good Thanksgiving as well. Anyways, okay, so Funky Euphemism is saying bonus quote, bonus quote, bonus quote. I got to get on that. All right, so this one comes from Rosa Parks. And I don't have a link for it up here. And the reason it really strikes me is because whether you love Rosa or hate, I don't know how anyone can really dislike Rosa Parks, but the Montgomery bus boycott where she refused to give up her seat was December 1st, 1955. It's December 1st, same day as my birthday. So I always kind of thought, wow, that's pretty cool. I was born on that famous day, at least something that people can identify with. And she had written an autobiography and then talked about it in a PBS documentary, maybe in the late 80s, something like that, 87, 88. And they were basically asking her, you know, what's the situation here? And she was explaining that, you know, a lot of people thought I was really old and tired, and I just didn't give up my seat because I was an old woman and I was exhausted. And I'm paraphrasing here, and if you can see behind me, I'm not sure. I've got actually a poster with this quote right below V for Vendetta. For those of you who are watching, I've got, maybe you can see it. There's a V for Vendetta poster, and then below that there's Rosa with this quote. And she was basically saying, look, I wasn't old. I was only 42. And I wasn't tired, not any more tired than a day at work that I normally would be. She said, no, I was not tired physically. The only tired I was tired of giving in. And love Rosa, hate Rosa. This is really the same message that we heard repeatedly from great founders, great revolutionaries. We can talk about someone like Samuel Adams. You have to be tired of giving in sooner or later. When government tramples your rights, you have to stand up and use the two letters that every 2-year-old child knows better than any adult on earth, it seems, and that's N-O. Sooner or later, you have to say no. You have to reject them. You have to resist them. And as we say it, you have to nullify their unconstitutional acts because government isn't going to grant us permission to be free ever. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you found it fun to watch. I hope you learned something, maybe. I'm not sure if there's a lot of educational here, but it was really fun for me to be able to share these with you. Again, I hope you had a really great Thanksgiving. I hope ramping up to Christmas and the rest of the holiday season is really good for you. We are in the busiest time of the year for us outside the normal holiday stuff because we are ramping up our website. We're ramping up all of our work, our outreach for nullification season. This is the time of year where a number of states are starting to pre-file legislation that we see in many ways as undermining and defeating some federal programs. And then from January-ish through around April or May, that's when most of the states are in the legislative session. And while most of the legislation they introduce doesn't get passed, most of it is really bad, there are some real gems that do quite a bit to support the Constitution and liberty. We expect to see 20-plus states considering bills to defend the Guard from unconstitutional overseas deployments, that is, without a declaration of war. We expect to see a number of states introduce and consider a Second Amendment Preservation Act to refuse to participate in the enforcement of all federal gun control measures, past, present, and future. We expect to see a continuation of efforts to protect and advance and support sound money against the unconstitutional fiat Federal Reserve System, plus taking on mass surveillance, whether it's stingray spying, license plate readers, the NSA, facial recognition, biometrics, and more. So keep up to date with us on that. You can see our annual report over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/report. We'll have that updated for this current year sometime in the next couple of months, but you can get a very good idea of how we approach these issues because the report is divided into two sections. The first half of it really explains the principle, the protocol, the strategy, and how it's applied. And then the second half talks about how it's actually happening on various issues like some of the ones that I just mentioned right now. And we say in the last 3 to 4 years, there's been more nullification legislation introduced and passed than at any time in our history. And we only want to continue ramping that up because we're talking about going head to head, David versus Goliath, with the largest empire in the history of the world. We're going to continue scratching, chipping away, and building the foundation for liberty for the future. Again, I hope you enjoyed this show. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. I'm wishing you an early Merry Christmas. Hopefully you'll be with me over the next few weeks as we continue to go through this program Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. If you support what we're doing, make sure to smash the like button, subscribe on YouTube, get bell notifications. iTunes, you can leave us a review. That helps us spread the word. Leave comments, share the link. All of those things, all the platforms are very easily triggered, so every action you take on it, the algorithm is told, oh, wow, I got to show this program to more people. So thank you very much for all the waves, the hellos, the thumbs up, whatever it may be in the comments section and all the likes. And of course, if you want to support us financially, it's 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. That's where you can join up for as little as $2 a month, and we make it go a long, long way. Again, thank you for joining me today. Have an awesome Monday. I hope your week is off to a great start, and I'll see you on Wednesday and Friday here on the Path to Liberty.